April 1951, Cambridge. A man is dying in a rented room. No grand hospital, no family gathered around, no final ceremony, just a small bed, a doctor, and the quiet sound of a life running out. His name was Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was once considered the greatest philosopher alive. He had inherited unimaginable wealth and given every coin of it away. He had written a book that changed Western thought and spent the rest of his life trying to prove that book was wrong. When they told him he wouldn't survive the night, he looked up. "Tell them," he said, "that I have had a wonderful life." Then he closed his eyes. The man who spent 60 years struggling to say what he meant got his last words exactly right. To understand Ludwig Wittgenstein, you have to understand the house he was born into. Vienna, 1889. The Wittgenstein family wasn't simply wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that changes the shape of a city. Ludwig's father had built Austria's empire of steel and iron. In their Viennese palace, Brahms would perform, Mahler would visit, Klimt would paint. The walls breathed art. The floors were marble. The very air smelled of ambition. Ludwig was the youngest of 8 children, and one by one his siblings began to disappear. Hans, the eldest, a musical prodigy, vanished in America, believed to be suicide. Rudolf, the second, walked into a bar in Berlin, asked the pianist to play a specific Irish folk song, and drank poison. Kurt, the third, at the end of the First World War, rather than face retreating soldiers, shot himself. 3 brothers, 3 deaths, 1 family. Ludwig watched all of it. He would later admit that thoughts of suicide never fully left him. They lived in a corner of his mind like a guest who never quite departed. But he didn't follow his brothers. Instead, he turned the pain into a question. Not why does life hurt, but something far harder. What can we actually say about anything at all? He was studying aeronautical engineering in Manchester, designing propellers, thinking about flight. Then he read a small book by Gottlob Frege, and something cracked open inside him. He abandoned the propellers. He crossed Europe and found Bertrand Russell at Cambridge, walked into his office, unannounced. Russell was skeptical. Who was this intense young Austrian with burning eyes? Within weeks, he wrote in his diary, "He is the most perfect example of genius I have ever known." Wittgenstein did not take this as a compliment. He took it as a starting point. He carried a restlessness that even Russell found unsettling. He paced. He argued with himself aloud. He could not tolerate vagueness. Carelessly spoken words caused him what seemed like physical discomfort. He had found his question, but finding a question is only the beginning of the suffering. When the First World War began, Wittgenstein volunteered. He could have avoided it. His health was poor. His connections were powerful. He chose the front, not out of patriotism, out of something far older. He wanted to face death directly, to test whether philosophy could survive contact with something real. He brought 2 things to the trenches, a rifle and a notebook. On the Eastern Front, under artillery fire, under the weight of corpses and mud, and that particular silence that follows an explosion, he wrote. He was captured, sent to a prisoner of war camp in Italy. And there, in captivity, he finished the book. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, a book so dense, so radical, that it ended with a sentence that sounded like a door closing on philosophy itself. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. He believed he had solved philosophy. All great questions were either answerable through logic or meaningless. And the things that mattered most, love, death, God, the worth of life, those could not be spoken, only lived. He sent the manuscript to Russell. Russell published it. The philosophical world read it and trembled. Wittgenstein decided his work was done. He came home from the war and gave everything away. His inheritance, the palaces, the fortune that could have sustained 10 generations in comfort. He distributed it among his siblings. He kept nothing for himself. His family was horrified. His friends thought he had lost his mind. He hadn't lost his mind. He had simply decided this. A philosopher who needs wealth to survive has already made a compromise with the only thing that matters. He became a teacher, not in Vienna, not in any city, in small, cold Austrian villages, teaching arithmetic and grammar to the children of farmers. He wore the same clothes every day, ate the plainest food, lived in rooms that made his childhood home feel like a memory from another universe. The children were afraid of him. He demanded precision. He pulled hair. Once he struck a child. The child collapsed. An investigation was opened. Parents, a school board. He resigned. He went to a monastery and began working as a gardener. Ludwig Wittgenstein quietly pruned hedges. Then something happened that no philosopher had done before. He came back, not with a new book, not defending his old ideas. He came back to say, I was wrong. The Tractatus was built on a fundamental misunderstanding. Language was not a mirror of reality, not a logical structure pointing at facts. Language was a living thing. It shifted depending on who used it, how they used it, and where. The same word meant different things to different people in different rooms. Meaning wasn't found, it was made. He began rewriting, slower, more careful, more doubtful. He called the new work Philosophical Investigations, a book that asked questions instead of closing them, a book that accepted confusion not as philosophy's enemy, but as philosophy's very substance. He never finished it. He revised constantly, cut constantly, doubted constantly. Some believe he didn't want to finish it. He had a cabin in the mountains of Norway, above a fjord, alone. He returned there throughout his life, sometimes for months, sometimes longer. No telephone, no colleagues, no conversation. Just the mountains, the cold, and the questions that refused to leave him. He once said he needed silence the way other people need air. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the silence of someone listening very carefully for something they couldn't quite hear. When the Second World War began, Wittgenstein left Cambridge. He went to London, to a hospital, and asked for the most basic work available. He became a pharmacy porter, delivering medicines, measuring ointments. He told the nurses not to let anyone know who he was. He wanted to be useful, concrete, physical, human, not in the world of ideas, in the world of beds and pain and hands that needed to be held. He died in 1951. He owned no house, he had no money, he left no completed second book. He left behind students who worshipped him, colleagues who feared him, and a body of work that redirected the course of human thought for an entire century. But what stays with you, what refuses to leave, is not the philosophy. is the image of a man who was given everything: wealth, genius, fame, and spent his whole life walking away from it, not because he was broken, not to perform humility, but because he looked at the question, what actually matters, with a honesty most of us will never manage. And the answer for him was never a palace. It was always the notebook, the cabin, the silence, the monastic work of trying to say the unsayable. And when he couldn't say it, he lived it. Tell them, I have had a wonderful life. Perhaps that was the only sentence he was ever completely sure of.